back to the Forest Avenue Sports Vine, talking college football here in our third segment. And this has been a very unique season because we've seen a lot of upsets in the top 10. And two of the greatest upsets in the history of college football this year, Appalachian State over Michigan, a team that is coming back very well lately. And we saw Stanford over USC in an upset unknown to mankind. Which of these two upsets do you think are, which of these are greater, and is either of these the greatest ever?
It's got to be Stanford over USC. They were 41-point underdogs going into the game. They were 1-3 going into the game, and their three losses, they were outscored by 90 points. They weren't even close in their other three games, and they beat San Jose State. It was their only victory. I got to say, it's got to be that game. You look at the Appalachian State game, they're a storied program in 1AA. They're used to winning. They're used to playing big games. Stanford does not have that history. So, I mean, you got to look at Stanford over USC, the number 2 team in the nation, through which, well, I guess USC wasn't very impressive, I guess, the first couple weeks. But I got to say that game was I was more impressed with that game than I was with the Michigan game.
The whole week before, USC should have lost to Washington in Seattle. They should have lost that game. But you have Appalachian State, or Appalachian, I think it's Appalachian, whatever. Maybe they can't pronounce it there.
Yeah, we'll have a segment on that next week.
But you have that team. They're a 1AA team. And you have all this hype around Michigan, a number 5 team, bringing back all their starters who are thinking national championship here. You have maybe the front runner and one of the front runners in the Heisman, Mike Hart, and you just have this team that fires on all cylinders on offense. They were not able to do anything. They had to pay Appalachian State $400,000 to come in to play them. Appalachian State didn't want anything. Michigan gets a loss, then loses again to Oregon. I think if Michigan ends up running the table in the Big Ten, going to the Rose Bowl, then that will be the biggest upset of all time, because you'll have them in the Rose Bowl having lost to a Division I AA team, or it just shows you how weak the NCAAs are.
But it was the first game. Both teams went in 0-0. That's why Stanford's upset was such a bigger deal, because they had so many games under the belt. It was it was in the season, in the middle of the heat of everything.
But it's in conference. You can never take a conference game for granted. And Jim Harbaugh, we saw being here at Drake that he's a pretty good coach when he had that one team. What was it? San Diego. It was just
San Diego. That's absolutely
just had that team. He was a very good coach there. He coaches Stanford and talks them up, but
the Stanford snapped like a 36-game home win streak. It was like 8 seasons that USC
But who
did
beat
not
them?
Stanford the first time. But this one was much more monumental. They didn't break this huge long streak that no one could go into Southern Cal and win. But they did impressively, too.
The one thing I will give the Stanford as an upset is they started a sophomore for the first time in that game. And we're just neglecting Kate right now. So
I was going to say, you want to get a cup of coffee?
I still have to say, when teams go in with a 0-0 record, it's really easy to brush it off as, they just need to wake up. They haven't got their season going. And you're right, Michigan's probably going to come back, make some noise in the Big Ten, maybe win the whole thing. And then why is that a big deal? Why is that upset so important? Because clearly it didn't affect anything. I mean, I think psychologically USC is going.
The one thing though is USC dropped from number 1 to number 2.
And what ranking?
The week before in the AP, and I believe it was was it both?
It was actually.
Okay.
Maybe it was both.
I think it could have been both. That they dropped. That's how the coaches might have seen something happening there. So it wasn't that great of an upset. If it was a number 1, I guess it would have been better.
It was a number 5 with Michigan, and I think if you put Stanford and Appalachian State together, Appalachian State would win over Stanford.
I'd like to see that.
I'd like to see that. Let's put in some phone calls.
Really, put in tons of teams, and Appalachian State could play very competitively against them. I think that this is an upset as far as the greatest of all time. Wait till the end of the season to decide that, because we don't know how this loss is going to affect USC. Obviously, since they were dropped from number 1 to number 2, this was a team that was a little overrated at the beginning of the season. And then this loss further solidifies that. We have no idea what's going to happen to Michigan. If they win their bowl game, if they win the Rose Bowl potentially, then yes, that's going to be a bigger upset than what happened to Southern California, because people saw, like Brent said, the wheels potentially coming off before they'd even lost a game. Now we talk about in a completely different conference, the Big Ten, one that people think is a rather weak conference this year. But we have seen a lot of very good teams. Ohio State could run the table. Michigan's starting to make some noise, getting votes. And Illinois, a team that nobody thought about at the beginning of this season, really doing well this season. So, Kate, what do you think about the Big Ten this year?
Well, just in regards to Illinois, great for them, but unfortunately, because it's the BCS, it doesn't matter what they do. They're not a favored team. They don't have a reputation. They're not going to get the bowl that they deserve.
And South Florida has a reputation.
I'm just saying, great for the Illini, but wow, it's not going to be fun at the end of the season when they get a bowl game they don't like.
Any bowl game for Illinois is great.
Yeah, I don't think that they're going to be disappointed with the bowl game, but I don't think they're going to make it to the BCS.
Well, they could.
I mean, they could if they run the table. They should.
That's the only way.
That's the
only way.
Look at
who they're playing. I mean, it is kind of a weaker
conference. They lost to Missouri
conference.
the first week of the season.
They came back and they should have had no business being in that game at the end, though.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that I don't think that they'll be there. I'm really happy for Illinois. Ron Zook has done a great job coaching. But in the Big Ten overall, I think it's just a weak conference this year. I could probably pick 3 or 4 conferences that are stronger than the Big Ten this year.
And you have Ohio State, who has a tough, I think, last 3 games, if it's not the last 4, are all against Penn State's in there. They face Michigan, which will be tough. They face Illinois. But I think Ohio State is the favorite in the Big Ten. You have a very nice story in Illinois. The only way they're going to make a BCS game is if they win the Big Ten because, like Kate said, they're not that story name, but it's not even that. It's just that the Big Ten is weak, and they don't deserve 2 BCS teams like they did last year.
Well, it was remarkable last week. We saw Wisconsin, a team who was in the top 10. They were underdogs going into their game, and then, lo and behold, they lose. So this is definitely a conference. Even if you're in the top 10, everyone feels like this conference could completely fall flat by the end of the season, and potentially it could. I think going into the final game of the season, Ohio State and Michigan could be undefeated in the conference. We might see 2 Big Ten teams in BCS bowls, but it seems unlikely. All right, we do need to take another final break before our last segment, so stick around here for more on the Forest Avenue Sports Vine.